December 2010. A cold wind sweeps over Ocean Parkway, a lonely stretch of road bordering the marshes and sand dunes of Long Island. Police searching for a missing woman named Shannon Gilbert move cautiously along the shoreline near Gilgo Beach. What begins as a standard search operation quickly turns into something far more disturbing. Hidden beneath the coarse, winter sand, officers stumble upon the remains of not one, but 4 bodies, each one carefully placed, each discovery more chilling than the last. Just like that, an ordinary search morphs into the opening chapter of one of America's most haunting and unresolved serial murder cases. For years, rumors of danger had floated around these beaches. Now, those whispers have solidified into a grim reality. 4 victims, lying only a few yards apart, their secrets buried beneath the surface for years. Who were they? How did they end up here? And perhaps most unsettling of all, could there be more? In that moment, the quiet expanse of Gilgo Beach becomes the epicenter of a sprawling, multi-jurisdictional investigation that will span over a decade and captivate the nation. The press descends, headlines scream of a Long Island serial killer, and law enforcement braces for a manhunt unlike any they have seen before. But as the world would soon learn, the discovery of the Gilgo 4 was only the beginning. Beneath the sands, and within the tangled web of evidence, lay many more victims, and even more questions. The search for Shannon Gilbert had cracked open a case that would haunt investigators, families, and an entire community for years to come. What dark force had stalked these beaches? And would justice ever catch up to the shadow moving along Ocean Parkway? Turning back the clock. Portraits of the victims and context. To truly understand the scale and tragedy of the Gilgo Beach case, we must go back in time and look at those whose lives were claimed along this desolate corridor. The story doesn't just begin with the bodies found in 2010. In fact, the roots stretch years, even decades, into the past. At the heart of it all are the so-called Gilgo 4, Melissa Barthelemy, found in 2009, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, last seen in 2007, Megan Waterman, who disappeared in 2010, and Amber Costello, also last seen that same year. Each woman, vulnerable in her own way, vanished while trying to make ends meet, lives too often dismissed, but never forgotten by those who loved them. Yet, as the investigation expanded, more names surfaced. Each one added another layer of complexity, another grieving family, another unanswered question. Along the winding stretch of Ocean Parkway and the neighboring Manorville area, victims began to emerge. Jessica Taylor, missing since 2003. Valerie Mack, gone since 2000, but not identified until 2020. Sandra Costilla, her life ended in 1993. There's Karen Vergata, whose identity was revealed only in 2023. There's Peaches, later, confirmed as Tanya Denise Jackson, and her daughter Tatiana Marie Dykes, a heartbreaking revelation that would not come until 2025. One victim, an unidentified Asian male, still remains nameless, his story lost but not forgotten. And then there is Shannon Gilbert herself. Her disappearance in 2010 sparked the search, and when her remains were finally found in December 2011, the official cause of death was ruled undetermined. Strangely, her case has never been included in the main charges currently brought against the accused. This is a story defined by absence, missing women, vanished lives, families left in limbo. It's also a story shaped by geography, a bleak, windswept stretch of highway where secrets are buried in sand, and every discovery raises more questions than answers. Who chose these victims? Why this place? And could all these tragedies be connected by a single, calculating hand? Or was something even more complicated at play? The cracks appear. Warnings, conflicts, and early clues. On the surface, the Gilgo Beach disappearances might have seemed like isolated tragedies, but dig deeper and disturbing patterns begin to emerge. Before the public would ever hear of a serial killer, there were subtle warning signs, cracks in the facade that pointed toward something much larger and more sinister. It started with technology. Investigators noted a curious thread running through several victims' cases: the use of burner phones, disposable cell phones, purchased with cash and discarded quickly. These phones, untraceable by conventional means, allowed both the victims and their mysterious contacts to communicate in the shadows. In at least one chilling instance, taunting phone calls were made from a victim's own number to her family, suggesting a perpetrator who wasn't just careful, but cruelly manipulative. There were other signals too, signs of a meticulous mind at work. Witnesses recalled seeing a Chevrolet Avalanche near the area, a detail that would later prove more important than anyone could have guessed. The disposal sites themselves hinted at someone intimately familiar with the geography of Long Island's South Shore. The killer seemed to know which stretches of Ocean Parkway were most isolated, and just how long it would take before the elements, and time itself, would cover up his work. Physical evidence was frustratingly sparse. In an era dominated by DNA breakthroughs, the only biological traces left behind were degraded strands of hair, missing the follicles necessary for standard forensic testing. For years, these fragile clues sat in evidence lockers, waiting for science to catch up. But even as forensic technology evolved, the investigation always seemed one step behind a phantom who moved through the night with chilling confidence. As the case progressed, it became clear. This was no crime of opportunity. It was the work of someone who planned carefully, covering his tracks before and after each attack. The burner phones, the calculated calls, the chosen locations, all pointed toward a perpetrator who thrived in the dark spaces between police jurisdictions and exploited every blind spot the system had to offer. But if the killer was so careful, why leave any evidence at all? Was it arrogance? Or was it a message, hidden in the patterns and taunts, daring investigators to come closer? The night it happened. A detailed timeline. December 2010. The cold air hung heavy over Long Island's Ocean Parkway as investigators combed through the sandy terrain, searching for any sign of Shannon Gilbert. No one could have predicted what they were about to uncover. Over 3 tense days, from December 11th to 13th, officers found not one, but 4 bodies scattered near Gilgo Beach, the infamous Gilgo 4. The victims had lain undisturbed for years, their remains hidden just beneath the dunes, waiting for this exact moment to be brought into the light. The news spread quickly. Long Island might have a serial killer, but the discoveries didn't stop there. As the new year dawned and the search widened, the mysteries along Ocean Parkway multiplied. On March 29, 2011, investigators discovered additional remains. Jessica Taylor, whose partial body had actually been found years earlier in Manorville. Just days later, on April 4th, Valerie Mack was identified, her remains scattered and separated by miles. That same day, 2 more bodies came to light. Peaches and her young daughter, later identified as Tanya Denise Jackson and Tatiana Marie Dykes. The grim tally grew further with the discovery of an unidentified Asian male, a detail that only deepened the sense of unease. By April 2011, the scope of the case had exploded. Each new find challenged the limits of law enforcement resources, stretched across Suffolk and Nassau counties. And then, in December 2011, the body of Shannon Gilbert herself was found in a marshy area, her fate still cloaked in uncertainty. Officially, her death remains undetermined, a cruel twist for the family who sparked the search in the first place. Years passed. The case seemed to stall, buried beneath public scrutiny and the weight of its own complexity. Then, in 2022, a breakthrough. Suffolk County established a new task force, breathing new life into the investigation. This renewed effort paid off in July 2023, when Rex Heuermann, a local architect with no criminal history, was arrested and charged in connection with 3 of the Gilgo 4. The following months saw more victims added to the indictment. Maureen Brainerd Barnes in January 2024, Jessica Taylor and Sandra Costilla in June, and Valerie Mack by December. The puzzle was expanding, stretching back to crimes committed in the 1990s. By April 2025, new forensic advances led to the identification of Peaches and her daughter, long-lost names finally reclaimed. And as the legal system prepared to test the boundaries of DNA science in court, one thing was clear. The story of Gilgo Beach was far from over. Each new date on the timeline brought hope for justice, and a haunting reminder that many questions remained in the cold, salt air. The investigation, witnesses, forensics, and ruling out theories. As the number of victims grew, so did the scale and urgency of the investigation. Suffolk County Police, joined by state and federal agencies, launched a painstaking hunt for both clues and the elusive perpetrator. The early days were a blur of witness interviews, forensic analysis, and endless cross-checking of records. But unlike other cases, the Gilgo Beach investigation was a battle against both time and the sophisticated tactics of the killer. Witnesses played a crucial role in establishing the case's early framework. Some remembered seeing a distinctive Chevrolet Avalanche parked near the scenes, a detail that would eventually become a linchpin in the case. Cell phone records proved just as critical. Investigators began to notice striking overlaps between the locations of the victim's devices and certain cell site pings connected to the suspect. These digital breadcrumbs, painstakingly mapped, revealed movement patterns that matched key dates and times when the victims disappeared. Forensics, however, proved to be both a blessing and a curse. The killer left remarkably little behind. The main physical evidence consisted of degraded strands of hair, found on burlap sacks and tarps used to wrap the bodies. Traditional DNA analysis was useless. There were no follicles, no roots. For years, the evidence sat dormant, a puzzle missing its most crucial pieces. It wasn't until recent advances in whole genome sequencing, pioneered by companies like Astrea Forensics, that investigators could finally extract meaningful genetic data from these hair fragments. Even so, the scientific challenges remained steep, and each step forward had to be meticulously documented for courtroom scrutiny. Matching the hair evidence, detectives also secured a seemingly mundane but decisive clue: DNA collected from a discarded pizza crust, tied directly to the main suspect, Rex Heuermann. For the first time, the pieces began to lock into place. Yet, the investigation was always cautious. Not all the victims fit the same pattern, and law enforcement refused to rush to a single conclusion. For example, the unidentified Asian male found among the remains led to a separate line of inquiry, suggesting not every case along Ocean Parkway could be linked to one perpetrator. The authorities balanced two tracks, pursuing the strongest leads against their primary suspect, while leaving other avenues open for victims whose stories didn't quite fit the main narrative. Every breakthrough was met with new complications, but investigators pressed forward, determined to untangle the truth. One forensic strand, one digital clue, and one testimony at a time. The turning point. Game-changing evidence. By 2022, after more than a decade of painstaking work, the Gilgo Beach investigation reached a crossroads. The formation of a new Suffolk County task force marked a fresh beginning. But what truly shifted the trajectory of the case wasn't just renewed effort, it was technology. Investigators returned to their mountain of evidence with new tools. They reanalyzed old cell phone records and, crucially, began applying whole genome sequencing, WGS, to the degraded hair samples found at the crime scenes. For years, those hairs, lacking roots, had seemed nearly worthless. Traditional DNA tests had come up empty. But with the help of Astrea Forensics, a breakthrough came. WGS, capable of reading even the smallest, most compromised genetic fragments, offered answers once thought out of reach. Suddenly, pieces that didn't fit before began to make sense. The investigative team also built a digital blueprint of the suspect's behavior. By reconstructing search histories, digital footprints, and communication records, they outlined patterns: planning, stalking, the meticulous use of burner phones, and calculated disposal of evidence. It became clear that the perpetrator wasn't acting impulsively. He was methodical, organized, and chillingly patient. With mounting evidence, authorities executed search warrants and focused their gaze on Rex Heuermann, a Long Island architect whose outwardly ordinary life masked a far darker reality. In 2023, Heuermann was arrested and charged with 3 of the Gilgo 4 murders. The indictment soon expanded to include additional victims, with the timeline of the attacks stretching as far back as 1993. Meanwhile, the case continued to broaden. New forensic identifications pushed the narrative's boundaries. Peaches and her daughter, missing for decades, were finally given names and stories. Yet not all victims could be definitively tied to one suspect, leaving open the possibility of multiple perpetrators or other unresolved threads. And then came a legal twist that could redefine the case. In 2025, the court began hearings to decide whether WGS evidence, so pivotal in identifying both suspect and victims, would be accepted as reliable in a New York courtroom. The so-called Fry hearing became a critical turning point. Its outcome would either open the door to a new era in forensic justice or threaten to unravel years of painstaking work. In these moments, the investigation's direction could change in an instant. Would the science stand up to legal scrutiny? And would the full truth of what happened along Ocean Parkway finally come to light? The trial and verdict, if any. As the summer of 2023 faded into fall, the arrest of Rex Heuermann sent shockwaves through Long Island and beyond. The community, haunted for years by unanswered questions, now watched anxiously as the justice system prepared to confront the case in court. But justice, as it often does, moves slowly, and the path ahead was anything but simple. Heuermann, a seemingly unremarkable architect and family man, pleaded not guilty to all charges. The state's case rested on a combination of digital forensics, eyewitness accounts, and most controversially, the new whole genome sequencing, WGS, DNA evidence. The court found itself on the edge of precedent. Never before in New York had evidence from rootless hair, sequenced through WGS, played such a critical role in a serial murder trial. It was uncharted territory, and the stakes were enormous. Not just for this case, but for the future of cold case investigations statewide. Central to the legal battle was the Fry hearing, a rigorous evaluation of whether the scientific methods behind WGS met the legal threshold for acceptance in court. Defense attorneys challenged every aspect, arguing that the science was too new, too untested, and open to doubt. Prosecutors, in turn, laid out the meticulous chain of custody, peer-reviewed studies, and the critical matches linking Heuermann to the victims. Meanwhile, the community waited. Families of the victims clung to hope, but braced for disappointment. Each courtroom development was followed closely by the media, while advocates debated what this trial would mean for hundreds of other unsolved cases dependent on emerging forensic technology. As of 2025, a final verdict has yet to be delivered. The proceedings are paused, hinging on the outcome of the Fry hearing. The judge, Timothy Mazai, is expected to rule after a technical review in early September, a decision that will decide not only Heuermann's fate, but the future weight of forensic science in the courtroom. What happens if the DNA is excluded? Will the other evidence be enough? For the families, and for the entire region, closure remains just out of reach, a reminder that in the world of true crime, the search for justice can be as complex and elusive as the crimes themselves. Aftermath and lessons learned. As the Gilgo beach case winds its way through the courts, the ripples of its impact can be felt far beyond Long Island's windswept shores. For law enforcement, it has become a defining test of persistence and adaptability, a case that forced detectives, scientists, and prosecutors to rethink what's possible and what's at stake when cold cases collide with new technology. The introduction of whole genome sequencing, WGS, for rootless hair samples represents more than just a technical breakthrough. If accepted, it could become a vital tool for unlocking countless unsolved cases, finally giving a voice to victims long silenced by the limits of older forensic science. But that promise is shadowed by legal hurdles. Every new method must pass the strictest scrutiny, not only in the lab, but in the courtroom. The Fry hearing, still underway, will shape how and whether this tool can be used for justice in New York and beyond. In a sense, the fate of future investigations hangs on a single judicial decision. The case also exposes deep vulnerabilities in how society protects those at risk. Most of the Gilgo beach victims were women living on the margins, often overlooked and underserved by existing systems. Their tragedies underscore a painful lesson. Those most in need of help are sometimes the easiest to ignore until it's too late. There's a renewed call for stronger protections, better outreach, and genuine coordination between law enforcement agencies, lessons hard-earned along the lonely stretches of Ocean Parkway. Yet perhaps the greatest caution lies in the investigation itself. Despite one suspect in custody and a raft of indictments, not every question has an answer. Not every victim has a name. Investigators warn against the temptation to force every case into a single narrative. The possibility remains that multiple perpetrators could be responsible, or that parallel crimes have been swept into the same story out of convenience. In the end, the Gilgo beach case is more than just a hunt for a killer. It's a lesson in humility, a reminder that behind every statistic is a person, a family, a community forever changed. And as science races forward and justice seeks to catch up, one truth remains. The pursuit of answers must always be balanced with compassion, care, and an unrelenting drive to protect the vulnerable. The Gilgo beach case began with the disappearance of one woman, but unraveled into a decades-long hunt for a serial predator lurking along Long Island's lonely coastline. as police uncovered more victims and new forensic technology pushed the investigation into uncharted territory. Families and investigators alike found themselves caught in a web of tragedy and unanswered questions. Today, as the courts weigh groundbreaking DNA evidence and the search for justice continues, the story of Gilgo Beach reminds us how fragile the line between safety and danger can be, and how every victim deserves to be remembered. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow our channel for more in-depth investigations into the world's most mysterious unsolved crimes. Share your thoughts below. What do you think really happened along Ocean Parkway? And which case should we investigate next? Your support helps us bring these important stories to light.